At some point, some people stop celebrating their birthdays. Not loudly, not with an announcement. They just let the day pass. No countdown, no excitement, sometimes not even a mention. And from the outside, it looks small, almost invisible. But psychologically, it's rarely random. Because people don't stop celebrating something that once mattered without a reason. Birthdays are supposed to be simple, a marker of time, a reminder that you exist, that you're still here. But for many emotionally mature or emotionally tired people, birthdays slowly stop feeling like celebrations and start feeling like reflections. And reflections can be uncomfortable. When you're younger, birthdays are about attention, about being seen, being remembered, being surrounded. As you grow older, they quietly turn into mirrors. You don't just see the cake, you see the years. You see who stayed, who didn't, what changed, what never did. And that shift alone is enough to make some people step back. Psychologically, people who stop celebrating their birthdays are often people who have learned to manage disappointment by lowering expectation. Not because they're bitter, but because they're observant. They notice the pattern, the messages that didn't come, the people who forgot, the plans that felt forced, the energy that wasn't returned. And slowly, their mind made a decision. Not consciously, not dramatically, but quietly. If I don't expect anything, I won't feel anything. This isn't pessimism, it's emotional self-protection. For many, birthdays stopped being about joy and started being about comparison. Where they thought they'd be by now, who they thought they'd still have, the version of themselves they imagined years ago. And when reality doesn't match the image, the day feels heavier than usual. There's also something deeply psychological about being remembered. When people remember your birthday, it feels like proof that you matter beyond convenience, that you exist in someone's mind when you are not physically present. When that proof is inconsistent, the mind adapts. It stops asking. Some people stop celebrating birthdays because they've spent too many of them feeling unseen in a room full of people, or feeling lonely despite receiving wishes, or smiling for photos while feeling strangely detached inside. That emotional mismatch between how the day looks and how it feels creates discomfort, and the mind avoids discomfort. So the celebration fades. Not because they don't value life, but because they value emotional honesty. There's also a quiet grief attached to birthdays that people rarely talk about. Birthdays remind us of time passing, and time takes things with it. Relationships, dreams, versions of ourselves that didn't survive reality. For people who think deeply, birthdays aren't just about being older. They're about accounting. What did I lose this year? What didn't heal? What stayed unresolved? And when someone has lived through repeated disappointments, emotional neglect, unmet expectations, broken promises, the brain learns to associate birthdays with emotional risk. So it minimizes the risk. Some people stop celebrating birthdays because they don't want to burden others with expectation. They don't want to wonder who will show up. They don't want to decode effort levels. They don't want to feel like they're asking to be cared for. Independence can look strong on the outside, but psychologically, it often grows from having to rely on yourself too early. There's also maturity in realizing that attention doesn't equal connection. A room full of people can still feel empty. A social media post can still feel hollow. So instead of chasing surface-level celebration, some people choose quiet. Not silence out of sadness, but silence out of clarity. However, there's an inner conflict here. Because even if someone says birthdays don't matter anymore, part of them still notices when no one remembers. Part of them still pauses when the date arrives. Part of them still feels something, even if they don't name it. Humans don't outgrow the need to be seen. They just learn how to hide it. And people who stop celebrating birthdays often carry that contradiction quietly. They don't want attention, but they want to be remembered. They don't want expectations, but they want sincerity. This inner tension doesn't make them weak. It makes them human. Psychologically, this behavior often shows up in people who feel deeply, but express carefully. People who think before they speak, who notice patterns others ignore, who learned early that emotions aren't always safe to display. They're not detached, they're selective. They don't celebrate loudly because they don't experience life loudly. They experience it internally. And over time, the birthday becomes less about marking existence and more about preserving emotional balance. There's also something important to understand here. Not celebrating a birthday doesn't always mean sadness. Sometimes it means peace. Peace with aging. Peace with solitude. Peace with not needing validation from external rituals. Some people replace celebration with reflection, a quiet walk, a moment of gratitude, a personal ritual no one else sees. And that's not emptiness. That's self-awareness. But there is a difference between peaceful detachment and emotional withdrawal. And this is where awareness matters. If someone stops celebrating birthdays because they've truly outgrown the need for it, that's growth. If they stop because it hurts too much to hope, that's something else. Emotional maturity isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing why you do or don't. And many people who stop celebrating birthdays never actually reflect on that difference. They just adapt and move on, quietly. As years pass, the birthday becomes just another day. Work continues. Messages come late or not at all. Life doesn't pause. And maybe that's the realization that stays the longest. That life keeps moving, regardless of our milestones. For some, that realization is grounding. For others, it's sobering. But it's real. And people who accept that reality tend to stop expecting the world to stop with them. There's also a subtle strength in choosing not to center yourself once a year just to feel significant. Some people find meaning in consistency rather than celebration. They don't need one day to feel alive. They build a life that doesn't rely on moments of attention. Still, it's okay to acknowledge the quiet ache that sometimes shows up on that day. The pause, the awareness, the brief reflection of where you are and where you thought you'd be. That doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. People who stop celebrating their birthdays are often people who've stopped performing happiness for others. They no longer need to prove that they're okay. They are okay in a quieter way. And if you recognize yourself in this, if birthdays feel heavier than joyful, if you prefer silence over celebration, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you've lived enough to understand that meaning isn't always loud, that growth isn't always visible, that some transitions happen inwardly. Birthdays don't disappear. They just change shape. And sometimes the most mature celebration is simply acknowledging that you're still here, still learning, still becoming, even if no one sings.